So hopefully by this point you have watched the videos on arrays and strings, or you're at least familiar with the concept in those videos, because we're going to be using them when we talk about data structures right now. So let's get into it. Just like before in the other two videos, I'm going to start with answering the question, what are structs? Structs in C. And then we'll talk a little bit about implementation and use and how you can use them and why they're useful, that kind of stuff. So structs in C, short for data structures. And what data structures give you is a way of organizing categorically similar data. I think that's a good way to put it, a way of organizing categorically similar data. So data that falls under some category that's sort of, or maybe categorically related data is probably a better way to say it. Some data that falls under some category, right, that you want to keep related, and you want a way to manipulate and access that data easily, efficiently, be able to reuse a lot of code, maybe not declare so many variables, that kind of thing. And the other thing to note about structs is that when you declare a struct, it's almost like you're declaring a new data type. And data types being things like your ints, your chars, your floats, your doubles. Making a struct is almost like making a new data type. And you'll see that when we get to the implementation. So those are really the big three takeaways. So I think the best way to sort of approach structs is to think of an example where it might be useful. So imagine you're writing a program for something like human resources, for a company, anything that might need to know information about the employees for that company. So what do employees have? They probably have names, right? Maybe they have some kind of ID number. They probably have a birthday. They probably also have a salary. They probably have a job description. That's probably good enough for now. So we have all this information on employees for our program, our hypothetical program that we want to be able to organize and access, update, retrieve, all that kind of stuff. So what we could do is, maybe we have 50 employees, right? Maybe we have 100, maybe we have thousands. We could make arrays of all of these. That's one way to do it. An array representing all of the employees' names, another array representing all of the employees' IDs, another array representing all of their birthdays. And we could just sort of store all of them like that. But it would be more convenient if we were able to say, here's an employee, and then keep all of this information specific to that employee, sort of package it all together. So anytime we were dealing with that employee, we would have access to all of his information, isolated from every other employee's information. So you're not working with a bunch of arrays, you're just working with the information on one specific employee. That's what data structures give you the ability to do. So let's go ahead and, outside of main, make sure you're not in any of your functions when you're declaring your data structure. Let's go ahead and actually write the declaration for this employee's data structure. So we'll start with struct. This is the C syntax, and then the name of your structure, which you can call it whatever you want. In our example, we're going to use employee. Open, close, curly, semicolon. And then in here is where you're going to want to actually fill in some of your information. So let's talk a little bit about declaring a struct, right? Declaring a struct, you want to, what's the best way to put this? You want to give the compiler the type of information that's going to be stored in the struct. So list out the type and name of the information stored in the struct. So what do I mean by that? We're not going to actually be assigning any values. We're going to be defining what this employee struct is and what type of data it needs to contain. So I'll show you what I mean by that. We've already said that this is what we're going to associate with employees, what we want to be able to manipulate and access and all that type of stuff. So when we're actually declaring our struct, you'll notice that I'm sort of declaring all these variables. Let's make the ID a number. Let's say the ID is an integer, right? Let's say the birthday is a string. We'll say the salary, maybe that's an int. And the job description is probably a character. And that could run a little bit longer, so I'll give it some more buffer space. It's 256, I don't know. That should be good. So what is this doing here? Remember when I said that when you're creating a struct, it's almost like you're declaring a new data type. So we can use this and make, just like you can declare an integer, or you can make an integer, you can make a float, you can make a double, you can make variables of all these data types. We can make a variable of type employee. And sort of contained inside that are all of these different types of data associated with the employee. But it's up to us when we create a new employee, which we'll do in main in just a second, to assign these values ourselves later on. So this is, you can think of this, you can think of the struct declaration, as a template for what the struct will be when you actually use it. So let's come down here and we'll make an employee. The notation for this is, or the syntax for this is going to be struct employee. And remember, it's just like you're making a new data type. So just like you would say int x, right? Or float y. We're saying struct employee and then the name. Which is a little bit confusing because, you know, normally the data types are one word, like int, char, they're all one word. This is going to be two words. It's going to be struct followed by the name of your structure. And there are ways around that, but we haven't talked about them quite yet. So just know that when you are sort of making, implementing your struct, you're going to want to have struct followed by the name of your structure. So it'll be two words. And then let's go ahead and give it a name. So we'll call this one employee1 for right now. So now we have our employee1, and we need to give him some information because we've sort of created this empty employee, right? We have instance is an object-oriented word, but it's not bad. We have an instance of this struct employee right here in employee1, but he doesn't have a name, he doesn't have an ID, he doesn't have a birthday yet. So we can go ahead and set all those ourselves right now. And the way we do that to access the fields inside of a struct is with a dot. So employee1 dot, and then we have all these options, and you see that the editor actually told me which options I have. So let's update the employee's name. Employee1, and we actually have to use strcopy for this, if you remember from the strings video. So our destination is employee1 dot name, and our source, we'll call him, you know, say it's John Smith. Let's unpack this a little bit. So employee1 is the name of our struct. And I'm going to put this in comments just so it's not confusing. This is just what we have. So we've made an employee variable, right? Well, actually, to be technical, it's not an employee variable. It's a struct employee variable called employee1. So the very first thing we've done is we've assigned him a name, right? And then, so we've assigned him a name using strcopy. And we have to use strcopy if you remember from the string video or from class or something. You can't just use =sign for assigning strings. You'll have to use strcopy or something like that. So now what we have left to do is we have to go ahead and fill out the rest of this data on the employee. So let's handle the strings first. Let's give him a birthday. Employee1.birthday. And we'll go ahead and copy in, I don't know, January 1st, 1985. And we can do the same thing for the job description. let's say he is a cashier. And then, because ID and salary are just integers, they're not strings, we don't need to use strcopy. We can just employee1 dot ID. Let's give him an ID number of 5782, and let's say employee1 dot salary. Maybe he makes he's a real good cashier. Maybe he makes 100,000 a year, right? So that's how you assign data to your struct in the simplest way. To actually access it, it's going to be very similar now. So if we want to print out the information about the employee, we can say the employee's name is %s, because we're dealing with strings, and it'll just be employee1, which is the name of our employee variable, dot name, and that'll access the name of our employee. So let's go ahead and print that, or run this so far. And the employee's name is John Smith. Put the colon over here. And just for completeness' sake, I'll go ahead and print out the rest of the information. So let's go ahead and do the employee's ID is, this is a integer, so we're using %d, and we're accessing it again with employee1.id. And I am going to copy and paste a couple things here, so just know all I'm doing is changing things like, this will be for the birthday, right? The employee's birthday is. And then I'll copy and paste another one for the employee's job description. And I'll do it one more time for the employee's salary, which again is an integer, so we want to make sure we're using %d. Salary. Okay, so let's go ahead and run this. And you see we have all of the information about the employee sort of contained in our struct. So let's review what we've got so far. This is the struct declaration. We're not actually assigning any values. This doesn't do anything. You can't see my air quotes, but they're there. This is just saying we have this struct employees, which is almost like a container for all of this data that we're going to associate with an employee, but we haven't actually implemented or declared it yet. We're just saying this is sort of a format of organizing all of this data into one package that we're calling employee. And when we come down here, when we actually make an employee, employee1, that's when we're assigning the data. We're saying employee1.name is John Smith, .birthday, .job description, .id, .salary. That's when we're actually assigning and manipulating the data. So hopefully that makes sense. I think it's important at this point to illustrate that the actual data contained inside your struct behaves exactly like the data types that you've already worked with. So it's just a matter of knowing how to access them. So if we wanted to, I'm going to go ahead and comment all this out. If we wanted to, for example, I'll make another struct too. Struct employee, we'll just call him employee. If we wanted to, for example, scan in the name, so we'll prompt the user for input. Please enter your employee's name. This will behave just like a string, just like any other string you've worked with. We just need to know how to access it. And in this case, we're going to be using employee.name. And then I'll go ahead and display it. Your employee's name is %s\n. And again, to access it, we use employee.name. So if my employee's name is Steve, your employee's name is Steve. Hopefully that makes sense. So all of those string functions we reviewed, strcopy, strcat, those all work exactly the same with strings inside of structs. It's just knowing that you have to use the dot operator to actually access them. And of course, I'll show you this too. printf, please enter your employee's ID. Because ID is not a string, it's an integer. When we actually scan it in, you can't forget to leave off the ampersand. So we're going to be seeing ampersand employee.id, which might look a little bit confusing, but just know all we're doing is we're saying take this employee, which we made up here, get the ID, right, which is just an integer, and then we're using the ampersand because it's not a string, and we're scanning it in. So I'll go ahead and display that too. Your employee's ID is %d \n employee.id. And let me go ahead and run this. So we'll enter the employee's name. It's still Steve. His ID is 1111. Your employee's ID is 1111. So that's basically everything you need to know about structures. You can... Let's do this too. We'll do one more thing, because I think this might be a little bit constructive. What we've been doing is we've been making these variables employee, employee1. So what if we want to have multiple employees? How would we handle that? We probably wouldn't keep making all these variables, right? And we definitely wouldn't want all of this code. So let's go ahead and expand on this program a little bit. I'm going to put some of this stuff into a function, so we don't have to keep copying and pasting it. So all this is going to do is it's going to be a function that's going to return a struct employee after we've entered all of the data. So just like any other function, we have this struct employee function, and I'm going to call it get employee info. And it doesn't take anything. It's just void. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to copy and paste some of this stuff where it's asking for the employee's information. I'm going to remove this line where it's displaying the name. And then I'm going to go ahead and ask for the rest of the information on the employee. So in this line, I'm going to go ahead and change ID to birthday. And I'm going to scan in the employee's birthday. Remembering to remove the ampersand because it's a string. And I'm going to go ahead and enter the employee's job description. Change that to %s and remove the ampersand. And I'm going to go ahead and ask for the employee's salary. So this is now in a function that we can call, and it'll be totally reusable. And the only thing that we have to do after that is return employee. So let's unpack this. We have a function of type struct employee, so we know it's going to return an employee with all of this information called getEmployeeInfo. It prompts the user to enter the employee's name, and then it scans it in. Sorry, my bad. We have to actually declare it. Struct employee. So there we go. We've declared an instance of struct employee called employee. We scan in employee name. We scan in employee ID, birthday. This one should be updated to job description. And salary. And then at the very end of it, we just return this struct. So now what we can do is, let's say we have multiple employees for a company. How would we handle that? What you can do with data structures, just like any other data type in C, is have an array of data structures. So maybe we have 10 employees. And maybe we want, we'll say in I, this will be our counter variable. So maybe we want information on all 10 employees to be entered by the user, something like that, right? So we can loop over 10, right? And for each one of those, I'm going to say employees sub I, remember that from the array video, equals get employee info. Then I'll have a display function too. Void display employee info, which will take a struct employee, and all I'm going to be doing here is I'm going to actually copy and paste this. This is the section where we actually just displayed all the info on the employee. And I'm going to be removing one because the name is employee. So let's talk about this function real quick. So it's a void function. It will not return anything. It's going to display the employee's info. It takes a struct employee called employee, and then it just displays the information like we were doing earlier. You know, employee.name, employee.ad, employee.birthday. So it's nothing new. We're just sort of relocating some of this code down here into a function up here, so we can call it multiple times. So going back down here, we scan in the employee's info using our getEmployeeInfo function, which is what we did up here. And then I'm going to say display employee info. And remember, this function takes a struct employee as an argument. So we're going to pass in the employee that we just created, which is employee sub I. And let's go ahead and run this and see what it does. So please enter your employee's name. We'll say it's Steve. His ID is 1111. His birthday is 01/23/1976. His job description, he's a cashier, and he makes 200 grand. And then the display function is called. So what's happening here? We have an array of employees, which means 10 employees, all of which have this information associated with them. We're looping over those 10 employees. For each employee, we want to get their info using this getInfo function we created, and then we want to display their info using this display function we just created. So that's sort of a way that you can combine what you know about arrays with what you know about structures, and then down here we also combine some of what we know about strings with data structures, so you can really sort of see how all this stuff kind of fits together and builds off of each other. So I'll go ahead and post this code on web courses for you to look at. Hopefully if you follow along with the video, maybe watch it a couple times, it'll make a little bit more sense. And good luck on the exam.